there's stuff that he's going to do that is good for the profits that big US companies make. Just, deregulation, all that red tape, he just gets rid of it. We will see the consequences of that at a much later date, whether that's environmental or financial or whatever it is, but park that for a minute, right? So he's going to cut the red tape, cut the regulation. He's cutting their taxes, which again, it is good for companies' bottom line for how much money they make. So from that point of view, that's why markets were so happy and investors were so happy to see that he'd won the election, because all things being equal, Kamala Harris probably would have brought in more green regulation, all sorts of different things. So he's a big boost to stock markets from that point of view. And we started to see US stock markets in particular really kick higher once people thought the game was up for Harris and once people thought that Trump was going to win. He does, however, pose a lot of quite serious risks to the stock market. One of them is this experiment he's talking about with tariffs, right? Putting taxes on imports that come from overseas. First of all, we don't know whether he's talking about 60% or 2.5%. Like, it moves around from day to day. We don't know really which country he's talking about. One minute he's focusing all of his energy on China. The next it's like, oh no, it's Mexico and Canada. And people are like, I thought these were allies. Like, yeah. And then he's talking about Greenland and Panama. And you're like,
And then didn't he already put in some tariffs for Colombia? Or is he in the process of it?
For like an hour, yes.
Like 25%.
Like the TikTok ban, basically.
So the story with that one, and that's the other thing, like you think to yourself, okay, I'm going to try and get like a mental map of what tariffs is he going to bring in and why and on what countries. And he's talked about how it's all about trade imbalances, right? He doesn't want to be importing too much from other countries. He doesn't want to be too reliant on them, and he wants to beef up domestic manufacturing, right? So that tells you, all things being equal, more tariffs on China. And in fairness, the Democrats have also been behind higher tariffs on China historically as well. So you think, okay, this is about trade imbalances, this is about domestic manufacturing. And then a country does something that just like annoys him. Like Colombia said, no, we're not taking like military planes full of people that you're trying to deport in handcuffs. If you're going to do this at all, then you have to do it with more dignity to these people. And he said, right, it was like a Saturday night or whatever. He said, right, fine, 25% tariffs on Colombia. And it's like, but where, I mean, not being funny, where are you going to get your coffee from? Like, are you really going to jack up the price of coffee by 25% pretty much overnight? And then Colombia and Trump came to some sort of deal. There's some dispute over who really won in that deal. The White House is saying it got the concessions it wanted, whatever. This is the sort of noise that we have to put up with now. And so the tariffs were lifted. So they were there for like an hour. But again, that goes back to the point I was making, which is you think you've got a decent handle on what he's going to do next. And it turns out you have no clue.
Your co-host, Robert?
Yeah, Rob Armstrong, yeah.
Yeah, from your podcast, he said that he thinks this year will be a bit more meh, like a bit just kind of floaty, not up or choppy. I agree with you. I think it's going to be very choppy. But already since he started, it seems like it's already becoming he's like doing a lot, like the ICE going around, like Chicago, Texas, deporting people who don't have, like arresting people and deporting them. So the things that he said he'd do, he's already started doing. And a lot of his executive orders are like, forget the environment, we're going to drill here, we're going to forget this environmental protected land, we're just going to dig it all up. And so it kind of implies to me that it is going to be a very choppy year and that there's going to be a lot of ups and downs and unpredictability. So the two economic policies of his that are most significant in terms of what markets do over the course of this year and over the course of the next 4 years are tariffs and deportations, right? And again, we don't know how serious he is about tariffs, where he's going to impose them or when. But there is some argument among economists around exactly how this might pan out. But the general gist is, if he imposes tariffs on imports, he's got a funny idea about who pays those tariffs. He keeps going on TV and whatever and saying, well, China's going to pay the tariffs.
dude, that's not how it works.
Consumer, right?
How it works is that the price of your iPhone would go up
Yeah.
by, 25, 50, 60%, who knows. The price of your coffee, if you do put 25% export tariffs on Colombia, that will go up 25%. At that point, either the companies that sell you the coffee or the iPhones or whatever it is in the US have to say, okay, fine, we'll bite down on it, we'll swallow that cost. Or they do what they're much more likely to do, which is feed it onto the consumer. Now, and that has to be inflationary, right? That has to, if you push prices up like that. The interesting thing there is that one of the big things that really got Trump elected was inflation. Like, voters hate inflation and they hate whichever president or government is in charge.
They all got kicked out, didn't they?
When that inflation takes in, they all got kicked out.
Yeah.
It's a really hard argument to win. So it's kind of ironic that he's risking doing something with tariffs that would jack prices up. Already people in the States are like, hang on, you told me that you were going to bring down the cost of eggs. And eggs have gone to a new record high since you took office. Like, what is going on here? So it turns out that prices are not as easy to control as Donald Trump might have made people think. And it also is the case that tariffs are likely to pump up prices, whether that's a one-off step higher or whether it's a durable and constant grind higher in prices, we don't know, because this is a kind of, let's say, novel experiment. So that's one big risk, because if you push up inflation, then all things being equal, the Federal Reserve, which is the US central bank, will have to push up interest rates. Stock markets don't generally like higher interest rates. Borrowers certainly don't like higher interest rates. Companies that borrow in loans or bonds or whatever it is, they don't like paying higher interest rates. So that could be problematic. The other bit is the deportations, which you mentioned. Again, we don't know. Is he looking at a few targeted individuals who he thinks need to leave the country? Or is he serious about rounding people up and putting them in like facilities and flying them out of the country in enormous numbers? Because if he is, then what he's going to find quite quickly is that those people are absolutely crucial to the US economy. They're cheap labor. And they're one of the main reasons why inflation came down so quickly in the States relative to other big economies after the pandemic, is because they had this massive supply of cheap labor that are working in factories, in meat packing plants, picking fruit and vegetables, So if you basically cut off that supply of cheap labor, then labor gets more expensive and companies have to pay more to their employees. And guess what you get? You get inflation. And when it's wage inflation that comes through that sort of channel, that tends to be more durable.
We see that in the UK. Service-based inflation, because we exited the EU, we lost a cheap labour source, and the service numbers are sticky because you got to pay people more to do the same jobs, right? And it just gets fed through to prices.
Totally. So he's playing with fire here, and investors, even like sort of the professional sorts of investors that I speak to every day, they really don't have a good, solid view on how this is going to pan out. So the tariffs are potentially destabilizing, and the deportations are potentially destabilizing, and that's before he invades Greenland, right?
Will it matter? Because the one thing that he is world class at, that he's done since he emerged onto the scene through the newspapers, is control the narrative around himself and control like the media and the discourse. Let's say he does a terrible job, markets crash, they lose the Greenland fight. Will he just find a way to spin this, do you think, and remain popular?
He certainly tried to. But again, consumers are not idiots. They know that they're going and buying their groceries in the States, and they're like, what, how much? And again, they really hate the inflation thing. And this is something that he absolutely promised to everyday Americans. I will bring down your prices. If he can't deliver on that, then whatever the kind of bluster, it's certainly possible that consumers notice this and voters notice this. This is the other thing around how volatile this year is likely to be and next year is likely to be, is that he's on a very short time frame to actually execute the policies that he wants, because in 2 years' time, there will be midterm elections. There will be, a new inflow of people into Congress. And that will make it more difficult for him to execute some of the policies he's been talking about. So, for example, trade tariffs, he can do just with his Sharpie, right? He just writes an executive order and it's done. Stuff like taxes, that tends to be somewhat more difficult. You tend to need Congress to sign off on these things. So if he's going to deliver the sort of maximal version of what he promised to the American people, then he needs to do it quickly before he has the possibility of running into a Congress that's less friendly to him. He might end up with a Congress that is still, overwhelmingly Republican, and it's no problem. But it certainly seems plausible that that is not how it pans out for him.
That was a clip from our full-length conversation with markets columnist from the FT, Katie Martin. You can watch the full episode right here.
It's lit.